Hey guys, I am Venkat and this is part 14 of web development with Blazor video series. In this video, we'll discuss how to filter data. So here is what we want to be able to do. At the moment, both filtering and paging are enabled for this grid. Notice at the moment, we have got 34 employees and they're spread across 7 pages in this grid. And notice just below the data grid header, for every column, we have a text box using which we can filter these rows. For example, if we want to display only male employees, in this text box we type male and then press the enter key. Notice now only male employees are displayed. You can see a visual clue as well here, gender : male. So basically all the records that are displayed in this grid are male employees, and we have 14 employees in total and they're spread across 3 pages. Now, if we want female employees, same idea. We type female, press the enter key. Now we have all female employees. So let's see how to implement this. This is the same project we've been working with so far in this video series. What I've done behind the scenes is cleaned up this page a bit so it's easier on the eyes. What we have here is a syncfusion data grid, and the data source for this grid is employees property, which we have right here. And we have this client-side employee service, which is calling our server-side REST API, retrieving the employees data from the database and storing that data in this employees list variable, which obviously our data grid is binding to. And these are the columns that we are displaying in the grid: employee ID, first name, last name, etc. Now, remember, to enable paging, all we need to do is set this property to true. Allow paging equals true. Along the same lines, to enable filtering, we have another Boolean property, allow filtering equals true. There we go. For this data grid, both the features are enabled, filtering and paging. It's that simple. And at the moment, if you notice, we are using the default page size, which is 12. And if we want to change this to some other size, we use a component called grid page settings component. We discussed how to do this in detail in our previous videos in this series. Now, same idea. To display just the male employees in the respective filter text box, type male and press the enter key. So we see all the male employees here. We have 14 of them on the first page, we see 12, and the rest of them on the second page. And similarly, if we want to see just the female employees, type the word female, hit the enter key, and we see all the 10 female employees on this first page of the grid. At the moment, to perform filtering, we have to press the enter key. But what if I don't want to press the enter key? As soon as I finish typing the filter term, I want the filtering to be performed immediately. Well, to be able to do that, we have to customize filter settings. And for that, we use a component called grid filter settings component. So inside our data grid, let's use grid filter settings component. And then what we want to set here is mode. And if you're wondering what value should we provide for this, well, hover the mouse over this mode property and you can see we have to supply something called filter bar mode. And as soon as I start typing that, we can see filter bar mode is an enum, and we have two options: on, enter, and immediate. On, enter is the default, which obviously we have been using so far, which requires us to press the enter key after we type our search term. Instead, we want to use immediate. Now, let me type our search term, male. I did not press the enter key. Notice, after a short while, we only have male employees displayed. Similarly, let's type female, wait for a short while, filtering is automatically performed, and we only see female employees. And to remove the filter, same idea again. Delete the filter value, wait for a short while, and we have all the records displayed. At this point, you might be wondering, can we control the amount of time that we have to wait after we type our search term? Well, we can. On this grid filter settings component, we have another property called immediate mode delay. The default value for this property is 1500 milliseconds. This means we have to wait 1500 milliseconds after we type our search term to perform the filtering. Now let's say we don't want to wait 1500 milliseconds. We want the search to be performed immediately, maybe after 200 milliseconds. Notice now the search is performed more quickly. Now, here is another interesting feature. In these filter text boxes, we can also use expressions. For example, let's filter by the ID column. So if I want to find an employee whose ID is 10, we simply type that value and we see the respective employee record. But what if I want to find all employees where ID is less than or equal to 10? Well, we can type that exact expression and we see the matching employees. Similarly, greater than or equal to 10 or simply greater than 10. Not just on number column type, we can also use these sort of expressions even on string column type. For example, in the last name text box, if I type LN, by default, it uses starts with search. So we see all the employees whose name starts with LN. But what if I want to use ends with search instead? For example, let's say we want to find both these employees, Galloway and Longway, whose name ends with AY. For ends with search, we use this percentage character AY. Notice we see both the employees whose name ends with AY. So the point is, we can filter the records in the grid with different expressions. Now, what expressions can we use really depend on the underlying column data type. If a column type is numeric, then we can use expressions like equal to, not equal to, less than or equal to, etc. If a column type is string, then we can use starts with, ends with expressions. You can find a complete list here. The default filter operator really depends on the underlying column data type. For example, if the column type is numeric, then the default filter operator is equals. If it is string, starts with. For example, ID column type is numeric. So if I type the value 10, notice it is using the default equals operator. On the other hand, first name column type is string. And if I type SA, notice it is returning us both the employees whose name starts with SA. So on the string column type, it's using the default operator starts with. Can we change these default filter operators? Yes, we can. And for that, we use this filter settings object. Now, on this employee ID grid column, instead of using the default equal operator, let's use less than or equal operator. For that, we set this property, filter settings, and when I hover the mouse over, we can see the value it's expecting. It's expecting an instance of filter settings. So let's use the @ character and then a pair of brackets, and let's create a new instance of filter settings object. And then all we have to do is set this property operator equals. Operator is an enum, and we can see all the operators that we could use. And the operator that we want to use is less than or equal. Now, if I type 3, we see all the 3 employees whose ID is less than or equal to 3. Similarly, 5, 10. We can also disallow specific columns from being used as filters. For example, let's say we don't want to allow users filtering based on this email column. For that, on the respective grid column, we set allow filtering equals false. Now, when I hover the mouse over this email filter text box, we have a visual clue indicating we cannot filter by this column. At the moment, on our data grid, we don't have an initial filter. This means when the grid first loads, we see all the rows. In our case, the entire set of 34 rows. Let's say when this data grid initially loads, we want the data to be pre-filtered by ID column. For that, we apply an initial filter. So inside this grid filter settings component, we use another component, grid filter columns. And inside this, we can use one or more grid filter column field by which we want to filter data. In our case, employee ID, and then value. This can be any employee ID value, 10 for example, and then operator, what operator we want to use. Let's use equal. Notice on the data grid initial load, we have the data pre-filtered by the ID column. At the moment, for all these columns, we are using a text box as the filter interface, and this is the default. But for this gender column, it makes more sense to include a drop-down list with the 3 options, male, female, and other. Maybe even include a custom option like all. We'll discuss how to do that in our next video. That's it in this video. Thank you for listening.